I'm your host, Peter Komendowski, and welcome to Surviving Bad, where we explore stories of survival, hope, and inspiration. Today, we'll discuss cannabis-induced psychosis with Kobi, a survivor. Kobi joins us to talk about his personal experience with cannabis-induced psychosis, so people are more aware of the risks and the things that made recovery possible for him. Out of the many people affected by cannabis use disorder, few stand up to share their personal stories. When they do, they are the most credible witnesses to the problems and solutions. Kobi, we welcome you here today. Please tell us a little bit about your journey here.
Peter, thank you so much. This is very exciting and a great opportunity. And I do want to talk about what you just said, which is that a lot of people are not fully aware of the risks. And that's kind of how I got to where I was, is I had been raised where cannabis and weed was kind of just this like mundane, safe, like of all the drugs, like a very like nothing really, like, oh, it's just weed, it's just whatever, it's like, okay, it's fun, there's no real like downsides or side effects or anything. But even so, like, I spent most of my life um not smoking weed and not being interested in it, and I was like, oh, I don't really need that. And then I went on a gap year program between high school and college. And one of my friends was like, "Hey, have you ever tried this?" And again, like I told you, like I thought that it was just kind of a normal thing and nothing could go wrong. So I was like, "Sure, I'll give it a try." And I loved it, and I had a really amazing experience with it, and that was kind of the beginning of the end. And I'm a very anxious person, and I found, once I was smoking, I was much more calm and more relaxed and more social. And I was like, oh, this is like the answer to all my problems. I don't have to worry about anything. And I just smoked until I was in the hospital, and having hallucinations and disordered thinking and believing I was somewhere else entirely and seeing spiders. This was a whole thing. And I learned that cannabis is not this like mundane, completely safe substance.
Yeah, there were risks.
uh,
What was
there
it
are
like? When
risks.
was like, do you remember like a time when you felt it slip from quote unquote the fun and the exciting to the dark side? Do you remember sort of the events that led to that and how it happened?
Yes, there were. I was already in college that point, and I was like smoking with friends. And then we had like a week off from classes. And someone was like, "Oh, I'm going away. Would you like to like hold on to my bong for me?" And I was like, "Oh, this is a very nice thing that I can do for a friend. I'll just hold on to it." But then I found myself like waking up in the morning and like smoking by myself. Because I was like, oh, well, I have this available to me, like, why not? And that was when I could kind of tell that it was a habit, but I couldn't really get myself out of it until it was kind of too late.
And what was the you said you found yourself in the hospital.
Yeah, yeah.
How did that happen? I mean, was it were you at a party? Were you just home alone? I mean, what actually turned that screw in your life?
Yeah, it's kind of confusing, it was all sort of a cloud, no pun intended, but it was kind of confusing as to how things deteriorated so quickly. But the way it happened is I had realized that I had been spending a lot of money on weed, a lot more money than I had wanted. And I had actually told my parents about this, and I was like, "Oh, I'm like kind of low on money. I'm worried about this." And they were like, "Okay, stop." And I also told them like I was smoking a lot, and they're like, okay, stop smoking weed, stop spending money on it. And it was actually a week after I had stopped smoking that the psychosis really started. And I think what led to that, I like I said, like I'm very anxious, and I was smoking to like cover up a lot of my anxieties and anxious thoughts. And once I stopped smoking, all of that anxiety came back. So I was like very stressed out, and I didn't have this kind of
And
this
probably a little bit of withdrawal at the same time.
yeah, withdrawal as well. Yeah, for sure, for sure. So I was very stressed, and I realized that weed had been regulating my sleep and how much I was eating. And so, because I would like smoke to go to sleep at night, and so I stopped sleeping pretty much, or I would go to bed very late, wake up early, um, and then I like stopped eating. I just wasn't hungry because I was smoking a lot, and that would make sure that I ate essentially.
Well, let's take a
And
short break.
yeah,
Take a short break. I'd like to continue the story because that's fascinating that, how life can just take control of you when you do
yeah,
something like cannabis. Well,
yeah,
after
right.
a short break, we'll continue our conversation with Kobi. Stay tuned. You don't want to miss this.
Well, because it's the best. And that's true because I've thought about that. I mean, definitely the fastest. And the biggest thing I hear most people talk about is the stability of it.
MediaCom's network is very reliable. We have a lot of programs in place that can monitor kind of issues that arise. That way we can fix them before they reach the customer.
Trust the pros. Get Extreme Internet starting at $9.99 a month for a year.
Malware and bots and worms, oh my. The wild, wild web can be a scary and complex place. And as our digital world expands, so too are the threats. Watch out! Trojan horse. That's why at MediaCom, we take security very seriously and monitor our networks around the clock to stop threats before they can affect you. Not today, Rude Kid. Not all internet is created equal. We build ours to keep you connected and protected.
Welcome back to Surviving Bad. I'm your host, Peter Komendowski, and we're speaking with Kobi about cannabis-induced psychosis. He's here to help us understand the often complicated relationship with substance use, mental health, and the healing process. Before we went to break, you talked a little bit about, stopping and then finding all this stuff crashing in around you and a little bit of withdrawal and all the anxiety crept back in. And obviously, you wouldn't have gone down that road if you didn't realize that the cannabis wasn't as fulfilling as you expected it to be. You don't stop something that is working for you. What was it like to go through like friends at that time? I mean, you have friends that you're smoking with, and then you feel like you're really, really close. But then when things start turning south, so to speak, what is it like? Are those friendships maintained? Is it like they're all of a sudden incapable? Do you just like drift into another parallel dimension? What's the world like when that happens?
I'm really really glad you asked that question, and it's a big part of my story. But I felt like I had to, for a little bit, I would hang out with those friends as they were smoking weed, and I wasn't, and that felt like very sad. And I was like, what am I sort of doing here? And eventually I was like, um, and I was very tempted to smoke, and eventually I was like, I need to not be around these people in order to really quit, to make sure they weren't being supportive. Unfortunately, they could have been like, hey, I get, that you want to take a break. I want to, like make space so we can hang out and not smoke sometimes. But like they were just, there was a big drug culture at the school that I was at, and they were just going and going. And so I was pretty alone. And like part of my psychosis and my psychosis recovery process was dealing with that loss of friends and kind of being okay with that and being like, how can I make new friends connected to this identity of me who doesn't smoke?
Well, you have a very comfortable personality, and you did something unique. You engaged your parents in needing to meet that solution. I
Yeah.
mean, Were you able to get back and connect with them when the friends drifted away and find them to be supportive through the process?
Yes, yes, yeah, that was, I felt very lucky. I was at school. I live in the States, but I was at school in Canada. And I went to the hospital in Canada, and my parents flew out specifically to meet me. So they were like there right away as I was like becoming more psychotic and very psychotic. And I think making that point of connection, and being like, oh, like, I was a little bit unsure at one point, even if they were my parents. And being like, oh, these are my parents, and they're here to support me, and they're people who are, able to sort of catch me a little bit during this fall, made it a little bit easier.
Now,
Yeah,
in
and
talking to
then
people
much
that
easier, but
okay, in talking to people
yeah.
that use cannabis, when you talk about cannabis-induced psychosis, you sort of get the eye roll. Yeah, right. That's like reefer madness, people trying to scare you.
Yeah, yeah.
When did the idea of this being cannabis-induced psychosis sort of reach your consciousness to where you were able to get a grasp on what it was, what demons you were fighting?
Yeah, that's a really good point. At the night before, like I went to the hospital, I had called my parents and I was like, I'm I'm up and I can't go to sleep and I'm perseverating, and I kind of felt like I was gonna die if I went to sleep, and I was really afraid. And they were like, let's get your uncle on the phone, who's a psychiatrist. And they called him, and he's like, "Oh, he actually like prescribes cannabis for some of his patients for anxiety and stuff like this." And he's like, "Oh, I know this. This is cannabis-induced psychosis." And I didn't want to accept it because again, I thought cannabis was a good thing. But so it took some time for me to accept it, but pretty soon after it was happening, I kind of had a diagnosis.
And what was like the treatment and the handling of you as a human being during this process of being hospitalized and treated?
Yeah, the hospital process is a lot of kind of sitting around, lying around in a hospital bed as you kind of go through all the hallucinations and such like that, and it's kind of hard to do anything else. It's pretty all consuming. So a lot of it was spent waiting. I used the treadmill. There was this little room with a treadmill, and something about walking and sort of grounding myself in my body was very helpful to calm my mind. But the big treatment, as far as the nurses and the doctors went, was just medication in the hospital, and they actually put me on a medication, haloperidol, which is an older antipsychotic that is not used so much anymore. But they were like, "We're going to use this because it's very hard hitting and it's going to clamp down on the symptoms." And it gave me a lot of really bad side effects, and that was
Well,
not
the
the
one
great
good thing
medication
was,
for me.
yeah, one good thing is they had a willing participant. You weren't fighting them.
And no, I wasn't. No.
Let's take another short break. This is getting to be really fascinating. Look forward to continuing the conversation with Kobi when we get back. See you all then.
Dad, I'm not glitching.
I told you with our new Extreme Internet, it will be smooth streaming.
That's unbelievable.
Well, you better believe it, Missy.
I already finished streaming the whole second season of my show.
So start the third.
What the fast? That's really not frustrating.
I'll take that as a compliment.
You should.
I'm gonna get some ice cream. Do you want some?
With the drama-free reliability of Extreme Internet, you'll have to create your own. Get super fast internet with whole home Wi-Fi for as low as $24.99 a month for a year.
You told me not to talk to strangers. You told me not to cross the street without looking both ways.
You told me not to touch the stove.
You told me not to do drugs.
You told me not to drink and drive.
You gave me so many messages about how to stay safe. Why didn't you keep me safe by properly storing your gun?
Welcome back to Surviving Bad. We're with Kobi, who bravely shares his personal experiences with a problem far too many people are dealing with in the shadows of their own fear, stigma, and loneliness. Kobi, talk about this road to recovery and some of the major steps you went through when you were grounding your life and finding your course back to a healthy life.
Yes. It's definitely not an easy process, but it is a possible process. And I think about four main categories of things that really helped with my recovery. I think about therapy, I think about medication, I think about family support, which I've talked a little bit about. I think about exercise as its own category because doing something physically that grounds you in your body, and as you get stronger in your body, you can often feel stronger in your mind. And community and friendship and finding people who sort of understand. And so I'll talk a little bit first about like the therapy piece, and then I'll pause. But so I was in Canada. I came back home to Boston, where I'm from, and especially my parents, mostly not me, but my parents were reaching out and scrambling around and trying to find anyone, and they found this really amazing recovery program at a local like hospital near us. And they had a two-pronged approach. They had group therapy, where I would meet with other people who had experienced psychosis, and individual therapy with a therapist who specialized in this. And a lot of it, like especially as my symptoms got started to get better, which I was very thankful for because I know people's symptoms can last. A lot of it was processing and understanding like what happened. Like you were this regular kid and you were doing well in school and you were enjoying your friends, and then you're like in the hospital and your whole life's falling apart, and just kind of being like, hey, this happens. This can happen, and it doesn't mean you're a bad person. This is everything you're talking about surviving bad. It's like you can make this life on the other side. And also meeting people who are at different stages of the process, people in the therapy group who are like were maybe not mostly recovered, but like well on their way to recovery, as I was like still struggling, made all the difference. Yeah.
So now let me ask you a question. Like sort of a before and after, these facets of recovery that you found strong, could you look back at before you started using cannabis and see that maybe there were some weaknesses that you should have been engaging in all those aspects of life, and that might have helped you stay healthier to begin with?
Oh yeah, I'm sure that's true. Yeah. Yeah.
What are some of the biggest takeaways for you? Like when you wake up in the morning, and this isn't related to anything you said. Who knows what life is like for you and wake up in the morning. When you wake up in the morning and you look at this world in front of you and you look at the bonding you've had with your family.
Yeah.
What guides you through the day, and you know, what are you emotionally sort of attached to the past that you've been through? Is it a like, oh my, that was dreaded, I don't want to think about it? Or do you look at it and go, you know, I really learned a lot from this?
I feel like I absolutely learned a lot from it. I feel like in the kind of obsession with weed, I had kind of lost myself. I felt like it was like my only hobby, and I wasn't really sure what I did or who I was outside of smoking weed. So I found a way to get a lot more creative. I returned to like writing poetry and making music and things that I had done when I was younger. Because again, like it wasn't my whole life that was caught up. It was about like 2 years of like serious smoking. And so finding those things that I love and that like set me apart, and finding things that I'm good at beyond just, oh, I'm good at smoking weed, was very important. And that was part of the like initial recovery process and also still now. But I think like the biggest strategy has been like learning to deal with stress and overwhelm without just like going to substances, which is very easy and very fun, but is not always the best.
You know, and that's really good advice for any substance that people, whether it's alcohol, tobacco, or cannabis, or now these new hallucinogenics. You know, a quick question before we go to break. you talked about the fact that for you it was only short, which is 2 years, but 2 years isn't that short of a time. And the people you met in recovery, were many of them many-year users, or did some people have psychotic breaks with much less use than 2 years?
Some of them did have much less use. And I want to also take the time to talk about Every Brain Matters, which is this amazing organization that is connecting people with psychosis recovery resources and support groups. And so I'm still involved with support groups now, even though I'm 5 years sober and 5 years into recovery. And I still meet people who like smoked weed like a couple times and something was just triggered in their brain. I know some people can be triggered if they have past family history of psychosis or of mental illness. I did not have any of that, so it really came as a surprise. But cannabis, and this is something that Every Brain Matters stresses a lot, if people don't know, is that cannabis is much more concentrated than it used to be. And there's a lot of THC, and it's easy to take an edible without knowing what you're taking or smoke a vape pen. And it's just overwhelming. And psychosis is too much dopamine in the brain, which causes hallucinations. So it could be kind of at any stage. And I have met people in different stages of use and psychosis. And
well, we're going to take another short break, and when we come back, we'll ask you to share some final comments, insights, and inspiration for our guests.
For sure.
See you all after the break.
I don't remember how it started.
Throw it to Dad.
Oh boy.
Our back and forth. It always came back.
Dad!
You probably don't remember what you told me,
That was perfect.
but I heard every word.
Welcome back. Today on Surviving Bad, we explored cannabis-induced psychosis. Out of the many people affected by cannabis use disorder, few stand up to share their personal stories. And when they do, they are the most credible witnesses to the problems and solutions. And Kobi is with us as a credible witness to what recovery can bring to your life. Let's see what insights and inspiration Kobi has to share. Kobi, what would you like to share with our audience here as sort of a takeaway?
Yeah, I want to talk about one more piece of recovery, which is that family support piece. And what I say a lot, I've gotten some amazing opportunities to speak to parents of kids who have psychosis. This often happens this way, but it doesn't have to necessarily happen that it's a child, but this relationship can sometimes happen. And I say, sometimes a kid with psychosis is not going to be that open to their parents trying to give them advice or trying to be there. But if as a parent you can continue to try to be there and to just check in every so often, it makes a huge difference on some level or another, or it may eventually make a difference for the child. I'm so thankful that my parents, because it was very hard for them as well, that they were willing to take that time and that effort and that emotional labor to continue to check in with me. But also, please take time for yourself and take time away from your child and take time to take care of yourself, because they may be in their experience and not thinking quite as much about your experience and how hard it is for you. So it's a balance, but if you can be there, if you can listen to them about their experience, sort of hold them through like the hallucinations and it reminds me of something I would play a game with my family called Real or Not Real. And I would say things that I was thinking and they would say, oh, that's real, that's actually happening, or that's not real. And they would always end and they would say, we love you and that's real, So like little things like that. I did a lot of puzzles with my family. It doesn't have to be always like hands-on support, but if they know that they have people there, that's what I would stress. And we talked about like being open as, your medication may change, but finding the right medication can make a big difference. Yeah.
And now the people that you did say that you sort of fell away from the group of people that were users. Did others of your early friend group go through recovery, and have you been able to reconnect, or is it just sort of a permanent disassociation?
Of the friends that I smoked the most with, none of them ended up experiencing psychosis, which I'm thankful for them. Many of them cut way back on their weed smoking after realizing that they were like failing school or something. Some of them have quit, but then I've made other friends through recovery programs who are in a very similar space to me. So like we talk about like, oh, remember when we really enjoyed smoking weed and we're so glad that we don't do that anymore type of stuff.
Now, if you could go back to a kid just pre-smoking weed, where you were, if you go back and give yourself advice. Now, we know you wouldn't have taken it because you did what you were going to do. But if you could go back in time and run into Kobi before he smoked his first joint or his first bong, what would you tell him?
Yeah, I would be like, this is gonna go nowhere good, that like even the fact that you're just enjoying it so much right now, right away, is probably a bad sign. But if you can find other ways to be social, other ways to enjoy yourself, if you can find other ways to deal with your stress, learn more coping strategies, and reach out to family if you feel like you're having a tough time earlier. Yeah, those are probably the main things.
Man, thank you so much for joining us today, Kobi. It takes a lot of bravery to share your story and bare your soul like that. And thank you all for watching today. Check out our website at healthyiowa.org and keep your eye on MediaCom MC22 for our next episode of Surviving Bad, where we explore stories of survival, hope, and inspiration. On MediaCom MC22, your local programming leader.